2022. We apologize for our lateness. We had a work session downstairs that took a little longer than we expected, an executive session, and I think we got some good things sorted out and gave some direction, at least to staff. So we'll start with presentation discussion. Item A is the meeting agenda for 26 May. And of course, we'll start with a call to order, roll call, pledge of allegiance, presentations, and awards. We have a proclamation for nurses and a auditor presentation. And the city manager's report. Mr. Fidget, is there anything on the city's manager's report that you'd like to discuss with us today?
Yeah, nothing specific yet, Mr. Mayor. I'm sure I will have something. I don't have my report with me right now, but
Okay.
so I don't think there's anything major.
Then we'll move on to the public hearing items. The first public hearing item is a discussion and possible action on a resolution for liquor license on behalf of Doc's Watering Hole Company.
Sure, Mayor Mueller, members of council, this is an application for an owner and location transfer of a Series 6 liquor license, which is a full liquor license, to be located at 1959 Frontage Road in Sierra Vista. The business will be Doc's Watering Hole Company. The notice of the public hearing for Thursday was posted on the premise, and to date, no comments have been received from the public, pro or con. The police department has done their background check of the applicant and has no objection with this license moving forward, and if approved on Thursday, the license will be returned to the state for final action. I do believe that the applicants are in the audience today. If you have any questions, and if you have any questions for me.
Comments or questions for Mrs. Adams?
Or was this one?
I like the name.
I do too, and it looks good from what the pictures I saw.
I know sometimes it says it was where it was transferred from. Was this transferred from somewhere local?
Huachuca City.
Huachuca City.
Yes.
Yeah, from
Any other
Sunset
questions?
Lounge. It's on page 2.
All right, thank you. We'll now move on to item number 2, which is a discussion of possible resolution of a new series liquor license on behalf of the Angry German. Mrs. Adams, may we have a second?
Mayor Mueller, members of council. This is a new Series 12 application, which is a restaurant liquor license submitted for the Angry German at 355 West Wilcox. As with the previous item, the notice of the public hearing was posted on the facility, and we have not had any comments, pro or con, as far as this license goes. The police department performed their background check of the applicant and has no objection to this moving forward, and if approved Thursday night, it will be returned for final action to the state on Friday.
Thank you, Mrs. Adams. Any questions for Mrs. Adams on this item? Any further discussion? Okay, well, thank you. We now go on to item number 4, and this is discussion, possible action on resolution dealing with the codification code of ordinances and declaring a 30-day public record. Mrs. Adams.
Me again. Yes, this is one of our housekeeping items that we do usually annually or possibly up to 18 months, depending on how many ordinances the council passes during the time period. We decided that this was a good time to do this because there were quite a few development code updates that were done in the past year. They're listed on the memo. Not every ordinance goes into the city code, but we do select the ones that do actually get codified into the city code, and what that means is they're just being officially accepted as the public and final record for the city. These ordinances are effective after the waiting period when they are passed, and they are updated on the city website when someone looks at the code. This is just the final stage of the process where you accept them. We'll come back in 30 days if there are any public comment and adopt them formally, and we will update our actual hard copy code books, of which I think we only keep about 5 now. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Questions for the city clerk? Thank you, Mrs. Adams.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Under new business, we go to item number 5, and it's discussion of the action of the regular city council meeting approval of the minutes for May 12th, 2022. Anybody have any, after review, do you see any additions, completions, corrections that need to be made? Seeing none. We'll move on to item number 6, a discussion of possible resolution, intergovernmental agreement with the Palomino School District for fleet maintenance service operations, and I just got Squires here. I don't have Mr., Mrs., Henry, or Harry, or anything else. So, and your name, sir?
Gabe.
Gabe
Squires, yeah.
Squires. I know you knew the staff, so welcome.
I am,
This is your
yeah.
first shot at
It
the
is,
council.
yeah. Mayor, members of council, the city currently has 21 fleet maintenance and repair intergovernmental agreements in place. These fleet IGAs help both the city and local government agencies minimize costs and maximize benefits with regards to vehicle maintenance and repair services. Staff was recently approached by the Palomino Elementary School District to initiate a maintenance agreement. The types of vehicles that would be subject to this agreement are mainly buses and passenger vans. And the city fleet section has capacity and is able to help the Palomino district with this request. So this resolution is to authorize the execution of a intergovernmental agreement with the Palomino Elementary School District for fleet and maintenance repair services. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Any questions for Mr. Squires?
I just had one. With respect to the rate per hour based on the vehicle, is that within industry standards?
It is. We so the current rate, we haven't, fleet has not raised their rates since 2014.
Yeah.
And so not quite a year ago, we did an analysis for our rates, and so they are going to be being raised July 1st, starting the new fiscal year. And we compared it based on what the city has to make to cover our cost, and then we also compared it to industry standards and in Sierra Vista, and then we took a little bit from Tucson as well. And so the new rates starting in July for light and medium is $109 per hour. That's labor. What we came up with in our analysis for light and medium vehicles for industry was $110, and then for the heavy, the new rates will be $120 an hour, and that was up at $155 was average.
Okay.
For heavy.
So those new increases will not affect this Palomino agreement?
They will. We gave them both. So the current rates, they were given the current rates as of this fiscal year, but we also made them aware of the increases in July.
Okay, and they were fine with the increases?
They were, yes.
Okay, fine. Thank you. That's all I have.
And you also charge, just out of curiosity, market price for parts, or we get a plus, or what?
We charge a overhead price of 15%
Okay.
for the parts. Yep.
Okay, good. Any other questions?
None.
Discussion? All right, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it. That brings us down to what would become a call to the public, comments and requests to council, and the adjournment. So we're done with item number 2A. We now go to item 2B, another great budget presentation, this time by the Assistant City Manager herself.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. I prefaced this presentation a couple of months ago when I talked about all of the grants that were available and out there and how many of them staff were applying for, and that was most likely going to substantially increase our budget. Well, it's going to substantially increase our budget. So we wanted to go through in detail what is increasing our budget and why as it refers to grants. And so we added this budget update in for you to go through just that. So I'm primarily going to go over grants in this presentation. So this is an overview of not all of our funds, but most of them, the ones that have grants in them, so you can see what I'm talking about in the disparity compared to last year because of all the grants we've applied for. So our general fund is only just over $50 million of the total budget. The rest is broken up into various funds. These are not all of the funds that the city has. These are just ones that primarily have grants in them. Our total budget for the year, we're expecting to come in just over $200 million. So, but the two biggest reasons where the grants are focused are going to be in the Herff Fund because of all of the infrastructure grants that are out there, and in the Capital Improvement Fund, that's the Schneider Electric project. So those two things alone are over $75 million of budget increase for next year. So I'm going to go through each of these funds here and show you what grants are in each of these and why those numbers are so high. Okay, starting with the largest one, Herff Grants. So as a reminder, this accounting for all of these grants is creating room in the budget. By state law, we have to account for these grants, even if we don't receive them, because if we do receive them and they're not in the budget, then we can't accept them. This does not mean that if we do not get the grant, we're going to go forward with the project. We don't actually have this money. So there are very few of these projects that would go forward if we don't get the grant. I'll explain which ones would and why. But by and large, if we don't get the grants, these projects do not move forward. So our staff have been, again, really hard at work applying for these grants. There's 3 major grants in here: RAISE grants, MPDG, and MEGA grants. Some of them are actually subsidiaries of each other. That MPDG is Multimodal Project Discretionary Grant, which is actually under the MEGA grant. We've applied for multiple grants for each one of these. So first one, the Shared Use Path Connector. So if we received this grant through a RAISE grant, this would primarily complete the multi-use path loop around the city. So each one of those, Coronado to Campus along 90, 7th to Coronado along 90, and then BST down to Kachina along 92. So that would create an entire unbroken loop around the city. We don't have any other multi-use path grants in the budget for this year, so that would be a really nice one to get. Buffalo Soldier Trail, that one is a priority in terms of applying for grant funding because of the expense at hand of resurfacing Buffalo Soldier Trail. So there's actually 3 grants there, and what we have done is budget for the largest grant that was applied for, and then the other 2 grants, so sorry, that's the MEGA grant. So $25 million is the MEGA grant, which would redo the entirety of Buffalo Soldier from Hatfield down to 92. The MPDG and RAISE grants would do smaller sections of that, but we're budgeting for the largest one, and then if we happen to get either of the smaller ones and not the larger one, it still fits within that pot. So that's a more efficient way than budgeting for each one of them, which just would continue to increase the budget. There's also matches, which I'm going to go through in a little bit, how we're taking care of the matches for each one of these grants. We are not budgeting almost $10 million in matches for grants. The other projects on here, Wilcox, Fry Boulevard, 7th Street, those are all projects that rank highly in need and expense on the street improvements list. So a number of applications have gone in for each of those. The West End Improvements project would be to construct the improvements on North Garden and design and construct the rest of the improvements on Fry Boulevard, the revitalization project. So if that grant was received, it would create the rest, or construct the rest of the project in one fell swoop. So staff went after that one as well. The Seer Park Shared Use Path, that grant has actually been received. That will complete the path, and I believe Ms. Zuniga went over that at our last meeting, and so that one is in the budget because we're not going to complete it by the end of June, so it's really a carryover for next year. So what we're doing, we do have some of this grant match budgeted, and this was another factor in why this budget year was so difficult, because you look at this and you say, well, there's $9.7 million in required grant matches there. There's no way we're going to get all of these grants. But we did need to account for some of the match because we are pretty optimistic that we will get some of these grants, hopefully. So if you recall, pretty early on in our budget work sessions, our capital improvements presentation especially, the construction of North Garden Avenue was the priority project for the Capital Improvement Fund. So $2.5 million was budgeted for that project. So what we've done is we've transferred that money into Herff Fund because it will be a road project if council approves the budget as such. It will be for a road project. So that is currently in the Herff Fund as a potential match for one of these grants. If we do not receive any grants that pertain to West End improvements, that money would go for the construction of North Garden Avenue. But as such, it is budgeted as a potential match. We also have, at another budget work session this year, we discussed the projects that were budgeted in this current fiscal year that became part of the Schneider Electric project for next year, and that amounts to $1.7 million. It was $1.5 million for the grant match for the LWCF fund, and there was $200,000 in the capital improvement fund for the parking structure at the PD. So that's another $1.7 million that is currently budgeted in the capital improvement fund, again as potential grant match. If grants aren't received to match that money to, it will remain in the capital improvement fund for a future year. If we are so lucky to get one of these other grants, like let's just say the mega grant, $25 million, and we need $5 million, that would be an excellent reason to finance the match on that. If we're going to be able to redo the entirety of Buffalo Soldier Trail, we would be able, with this budget, to go ahead and finance that $5 million to do that construction. So that's currently the way that we are handling the match for most of these grants. Questions?
That's like quite a juggling act.
Yep.
Yeah.
It has been a massive juggling act, and many kudos go to Jen and David for working this out too.
I think, Mr. Mayor, we have tremendous opportunities here, with the amount of grants we're able to apply to. And we had a discussion about street maintenance last time. And if we can get grants for Buffalo Soldier Trail, Wilcox, 7th, Fry, that's a major chunk of street maintenance that could be done, with grants. So, the trick then was, well, how do we budget for this in the most efficient way, knowing that we may get some and not others. So that's the juggling act that Victoria just went through here. So otherwise, you'd have a $300 million budget instead of a $200 million one.
And a lot of projects we wouldn't be doing because we would have to find the money to budget those matches, which we might not get the grants. And so it wasn't worth doing that and taking away from other projects when we might not get these grants. And I also think it's worth pointing out that that is a lot of potential money in addition to the $1.5 million that we have budgeted for street maintenance. Regardless of what grants are received, at least that $2.5 million is budgeted for North Garden. That's $2.5 million in street improvements in addition to your $1.5 million. Okay, our Eltaf grants, these are primarily transit grants. These are pretty standard. There's not much different here. A lot of this is carryover, which is why you saw an increase over last year. Everything at the top, those are federal fiscal year 20 and CARES Act carryovers. We're having trouble getting any kind of vehicle or piece of equipment in within a fiscal year, so they're all being carried over. The projects on the bottom, those are newer projects. The multi-use paths, I apologize, those are actually mislabeled. Those will be, it's a multi-use path fund, but they are going to be sidewalks. So it's ADA accessibility and sidewalks. Those are the Judd, Fifth, and Bel Air sidewalks that were mentioned before, and we'll try and fit some street lights and so on in there as well. then the new bus and some software. I've been trying to find out all day what that software is for, and I haven't been able to. So we'll.
Sharon's raising her hand.
Rachel?
Oh, good. So Sharon found out.
Yes. So the B2G Now software is something that would be used primarily by Yolanda in finance, and it tracks compliance with the federal grant process. So this would enable her to help us stay fully FTA compliant with our transit grants.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Victoria, on where you said it was mislabeled multi-use paths under the 5307, well, under the project for Eltaf. So this is not part of those funds that's to be used to do multi-use connectivity between bus stops?
It might be.
Is
Matt,
that the
can you
same amount of pot of
clarify?
money?
I think so.
Go ahead, Matt.
Right. It is, Mr. Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem Gray, it is the same pot of money for accessibility improvements within a half mile of a bus stop. And there's discretion as to whether it's shared use paths, sidewalks or street lighting, ADA ramps. They all fit into that category of the grant.
Okay, so there's no sidewalks in these 3 bus stops now, is that?
The proposed sidewalks would fill in the gaps along Bel Air and Judd Street, Fifth, not Taylor,
So Bel Air, Judd, and Fifth.
and Taylor south of Cayetan, or Nelson Drive rather.
Say that one more time, please. Bel Air, Fifth, Judd,
And Taylor.
Taylor. Thank you. Okay. I'm just gonna go right by. I think I need to visually see what's there and to understand why we're doing sidewalks. So.
Well, Judd, you got dirt and you got the lamps, and that's it.
And that's it. Okay.
Yeah.
And Matt, is this related to the right-of-way dedication that happened a few weeks ago?
Yes, it enabled the project to go forward. And then Bel Air, there's McDonald's on one end, and then Bel Air Mobile Home Park on the other. There's a lot of pedestrian activity there. Fifth Street, also Frytown neighborhood, a lot of pedestrian needs there, and then the park along Taylor Drive.
Right. And I'm not disputing. I'm just having a problem visualizing all of them. So I'll just go drive them. Thank you.
Okay, this is just the general grants fund, and this is pretty typical of our grants year to year. Jen labeled each one, which one is in each one of these, so you're going to find your regular CDBG projects, advertising and PIO. Ms. Wilson always applies for football and baseball grants. We did include the general placeholder at the top, the potential federal grants, just in case. We have plenty of room, but we did throw in another keep because we did it last year as well, $4 million for a grant that we have not found and applied for yet. So that is a little bit of room for an unnamed grant that might come up.
Economic Development Grant.
That's the broadband.
Can we go back one? That's what I think too. Okay, never mind.
We got it.
Okay.
We should hit it so the public can hear it though.
No.
All right, airport grants, the airport layout plan narrative. I believe that's a master plan update through the FAA for the airport. And then the airport hangars is a continuation from last year. That is potential Forest Service building. We are in a process working with the Forest Service right now for a potential building. So that would allow us match and grant application for that. Okay, and finally, capital improvement fund itself. The Schneider Electric project was broken up between facilities, parks, and aquatics, and the bond issuance costs. It's simply the way we budget for it. Potential property purchase, we talked about that in executive session. And there's another note, again, the $2.5 million project for North Garden was budgeted here, but that money is currently transferred over to Herff. So. That's the end of our brief on all of the grants. Just a quick reminder, Jen is working as hard as she can to get your budget books out by this Friday. You will have all of the long holiday weekend to read them at your leisure, as well as all of next week. And then we have all of your one-on-one council member meetings scheduled for the following week. Thank you all for scheduling those. The budget work sessions, those were placed on your calendar earlier this week. Mondays was placed on your calendar, the 13th was firm, and then the next 2 days were added as tentative in case we need them. Your tentative budget vote will be June 23rd, July 28th, your final budget vote and property tax hearing, and then August 11th, your property tax vote and the conclusion of this year's lengthy budget process.
And just asking for a preview on the property tax. We're staying the same. We're dropping. Which one?
You'll be doing, Mr. Mayor, just like you normally do. The AV goes up and the rate goes down.
Okay. All right. Questions for
Any
the
other
assistant
questions?
city manager? Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Mr. Mayor, members of council.
We next go on to the Psprs presentation to council. David.
Mayor, members of council, of course, we all know this is a very exciting topic. I will try not to put you to sleep, get through here quickly and efficiently. A lot of people ask, what is this liability? But before we go on that, and because some of you are new, or some of you may have forgotten a little bit of background, City of Sierra Vista joined Psprs in 1972. This is like the mafia. Once you're in, you don't get out. Thank you. Have a nice day. Every year, an actuarial is hired by Psprs, and they come up with a liability and a contribution amount for each individual entity. And when I mean entity, it's not like the city. Our city police department has one valuation, and the city fire department has a separate valuation. The assets are separate, the liabilities are separate. We had the fire department funded at 200%, and the police department funded 135% 20 years ago. So they all change individually as raises, as returns, and everything else go. And the reports are put out at the Psprs website, so you can always go in and see what they are and that type of thing. Every 5 years, they update the assumptions. They go back through, see what was really happening with the market, with returns, with costs, with life expectancies, things that have changed. I will point out that you may hear at times that firefighters all die within 5 years of retirement. We've had people say that before because the hazards that they experience, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, the actuarials do not agree with that, or we would not be sitting here with the fire liability we do. So the actual experience is not quite indicative of some of the things that some people are saying, and that's kind of important for you guys to know that. But they do look at all the medical trends, all the history, and how people in that industry are doing. It's not that they take the average, they will make it specific to the industry. Big changes have occurred in Psprs over the last few years. In 2016, they changed how the annual increase was done. Before it was called a PBI, a permanent benefit increase. And what happened was in 1 year, any excess return over 9% was split. Half went back into the system, half went to the employee, the retirees, as a permanent adjustment. And it has nothing, it was not an average, it was a one-time thing. So in 2003 and 2004, the system lost 25% of the whole portfolio value. 25% gone. They invested in tech stocks. The next year, they had a 17% return. They're not close to getting back to where they were, but they got a 4% permanent adjustment. In 2008, they decided to get into real estate. Lost 25% of the value again. Well, that PBI, the members' rate is fixed. Who made up the difference on that shortfall? The city did. Again, a year or two later, excess return, permanent adjustment. Also understand that this 4% return, it's not like the rank and file officer and the retired chief and the Phoenix officer and the Bisbee officer all got the same percentage increase. No. They calculated a dollar increase, and every member got the same dollar increase. So for a high-level, high-paid retiree, that'd be less than 4%. For a low-paid in the scale retiree, like a Bisbee officer or Douglas officer, that is in excess of 4% annual increase. So when they lose the money the next year, that's how South Tucson, Bisbee, and all of these got into the situation that they were done. And to affect this too, in 2019, Psprs changed its actuarial company, the people that do it. Actuarials are like various other ones. They have their own opinions on assumptions and things like that. So they have made some changes to the system, and that's why for a couple of the data points I'm going to give you, I have a 3-year history, not a longer history. So the first question is always, what is this? This is simply a mathematical guesstimate of what we owe the people after the current employees and the retirees to fund the promised retirement payments for the rest of their life. Of course, this is a guesstimate, and small assumption changes. Any of you guys who have played with interest rates, small changes in your assumptions can have huge swings on your outcome. For an example, when we first had the OPEB liability, I disagreed with our insurance actuarial, and for a 0.5% change in the assumption increase on the insurance costs, that cut the liability in half. $20 million variation based on a 0.5% change in the cost estimate of the increase of medical. So here's what goes into it. We have officers and firefighters. Who's going to retire? Who's going to leave beforehand? That's a guesstimate. If they retire, are they going to retire at 20, 25, 32 years? Take averages. What will the retirement pay be? How many raises are we going to give? Are we going to, they're going to get promotions? Are we going to give market adjustments like we are right now? How long are they going to live after they retire? 5, 10, 20 years? And, of course, the big one, what will the return on the investments be? Are they going to make that return? A couple of years ago, Psprs made a 0.5% return on its investment and paid their investment fees of $100 million to do that. I can beat that for half that price. But other years, they've had obviously better returns, 17%, or they've lost. So how did we get here? Well, as I mentioned before, the investment plan. 25% loss in 2003, 2004, and 25% loss in 2008, 2009. Those were big ones. That COLA structure. That COLA structure with the PBI really hurt. The drop program hurt. We had a person enter the drop program, increase the liability $1.4 million by that one person entering the drop program. When we make this contribution, we discuss all the time 63%, 59% contribution. There's 3 portions of it. First is the normal cost. That is what we say normally would be. If there was no unfunded liability, if we were all good like we were back years back, this is what we should put away every year. It runs about 10 to 12%, just like ASRS. Then there's the amortization of the unfunded liability. That's what really drives this thing up. That's the big one. And then, of course, there's a small piece, 1% or so, for the health insurance, for their long-term unfunded health benefit. So this is how they come up with the rate. They calculate the cost. How much am I supposed to put aside this year to fund this liability? Then they add in the unfunded liability. What is your payment this year to help pay off the unfunded liability within a 20-year period? You add those two together, you get the total cost for the year. Then here comes the interesting part, is then they calculate the underlying payroll. The underlying payroll is based on one date in the whole fiscal year. The number of who is in the system on June 30th of the fiscal year. If we've had 3 officers retire the week before, all of their salary information, all of that is taken out of this calculation. And that number has a huge effect on that percentage, because you take that amount that you have to pay, divide it by the payroll, that brings up the percentage. So when it says our payroll has dropped, the payroll calculation has dropped by $300,000 from the prior year, that obviously pushes it up. The importance of this is, as Tier 1 continues to decrease, and all the new people are coming in to Tier 3, that number, that underlying payroll will continue to decrease. So you're going to get this funky looking larger number. So here's our contribution rates and our funding percentages over the last 23 years. As you can see, it has not been good. And this is an important point when we get to options that we have and for what other cities have done, like bonding, the unfunded liability, like Bisbee just did. So this is just kind of information for you on the historical thing and how we got here as well. And here's the annual contribution rate. A nice thing that's been put in the last 3 actuarial reports is they're starting to break down what has caused this change and increase. So for instance, for our current year, our payroll adjustment for the police department caused an increase of just over 6% in this contribution rate. So as I've talked with people and others, this rate is kind of a number, but it's not a number to judge how well we are doing on the system. Here's the budgeted amount. This is kind of what we do. We take the number and we'll get into additionally how we come up with this number, because this is including extra numbers, extra calculations to put in here based off our policies that we did. Here's the important fact. Here's the 2 important numbers really that we need to be focusing on, and this shows what a good job we're doing. You see in 2021 to 2023, our total pension cost has been decreasing each year. That is our required contribution. That is the important number. The other important number is the funding ratio. That's the assets to liabilities. And you'll see in both of them, they've gone up significantly. So what we are doing over the last 3 years is working. It is helping. And as you can see where the underlying payroll is changing, that's where you get the funky increase in percentage, yet we're looking better, and our funding ratio has gone up over 10%. Yet, if you go based off that contribution number, you think you're not doing well. So, here's our policy that we currently have in the system that council approved a few years back. Of course, we're going to contribute the mandatory amount. But what we also are doing to help fund this is when a person enters the drop, the city's no longer required to fund them. We do. We put in the budget that we're going to pay all the drop people, and we're going to continue to contribute to PSPRS for them. We're going to pay the total budgeted amount even if we don't have employees. So for instance, we budget all the vacant officer and all the vacant firefighter positions. We put that in the budget. That's calculated. We make that contribution for those positions even though they are not funded. That is extra contribution. When we've been striving, we've been able to do for the last couple of years, pay 100% of the contribution the first week of the new fiscal year. Paradise Valley estimated they're getting an extra $50,000 a year in investment earnings by doing that. And then what we also have been doing is when you go back to that chart where it shows the contribution rate, that it went from 64% in police to 59%, we're going to continue to pay at that higher percentage rate. So that's why the budgeted amount includes all of these things. And so, like your home mortgage, if you keep the higher rate, that will help pay off the unfunded liability quicker. There's a couple other options that people have been looking at doing that. First is bonding the unfunded liability. This is, in my opinion, and the city manager's opinion, not a good option. First off, this is what in the financial industry is called an arbitrage play. I'm going to hope that the money I pay on the bonds I issue is less than the interest rate that PSPRS is going to earn. Unfortunately, their track record is not the best. Now, the IRS knows that this is an arbitrage play, so all your retirement bonds are taxable bonds. They don't get the tax-free interest rate like we do when you do the Schneider project. That's why you see a 5% interest rate instead of a 3% interest rate for Bisbee when they issued it. Yeah. That's a very important part. So now you need to earn at least a 5% return on average for that to work out. And again, we pay it off now, and in 15 years, I've got a $2 million bond payment. PSPRS has performed like it has, and I'm back to a $2 million PSPRS payment. Now I got twice the payment, and we're in the same boat. So the only realistic way, if you were to bond, is to take half of that savings and keep making extra payments to PSPRS and hope that they learn to do better. There's a new Section 115 trust plan. Some cities are looking at it. Unfortunately, what it is not included in the calculation of unfunded liability. It allows us to control where the money is put into and us to get a different return based off who we invest it with. But as long as this is not included in the calculation, then our funding ratio will be down because it will not count any of these extra contributions we're making. Finally, what we are recommending to do, and we're actually doing it this year, is as the police officer and firefighter leaves at the high salary and we bring a person in at the low salary, we're going to calculate that PSPRS contribution at the exiting officer's salary. So that is, again, an extra contribution. And I found out that Scott McCarty from Queen Creek was very involved in this. Queen Creek budgets their retirement calculation as if everybody were at max salary, every single position of theirs. That's a bit of a chunk to bite off right now, so we're just going to do this as time goes on every year, as officers and firefighters leave and new ones come in and the vacant positions come in. We're going to do this staggered over time so we don't have a large hit the first year. So that's the end of the presentation. Be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Questions from Mr. Felix? Sir.
I like how you presented this. This has always been very troublesome since I've been on council to try to understand everything that's going on here, and I think your presentation today was spot on. Thank you. One thing, I did notice that Bisbee did bond, and they were lamenting because they ended up with, what, a 5.6%?
5.08% interest, yes.
Right, and, you know, right now, I attended a PSPRS seminar a while back, and they were bragging that they were doing, I think, about 7.3 at this point in time. But like you say, the record is not very good. Mr. Felix, how long do you think it will be before the city can catch up? Have you done any, put your hands on the crystal ball and tried to figure that out?
If we make, our thing is supposed to be paid off, I believe we're at 21 years now. That is the amortization. Every year, the amortization goes down a year. So when the state law got put in place and when the legislature started to fix it, they started with a 30-year amortization. And so every year, it was set to pay off, I believe in 2050 is when, or earlier is when they're supposed to be paid off and we're supposed to be whole. Obviously, by making extra contributions, we can do that earlier. They're developing a model that we can play with to see what the extra contributions will do for us. I've seen it and haven't gotten to delve into it too much, but what I have is, again, guesstimates. But the key, and if you think about this logically, there's only two ways money gets put into the system for us. Our contributions and the return. And the return is the wild card. Because one year they'll get 17%, and another year they'll lose 24%.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Johnson, that is a really good question, and there are some communities, and unfortunately Bisbee is one of them, and their rates are well over 100% in terms of what they have to pay in. We're not at that point, so a lot of smaller communities are in this situation, and although we are not in a position where we would want to recommend pension bonds to pay off. Some of the communities, that is really the only option that they have to get out from under the situation that they're in. And as Dave mentioned, the reason we wouldn't recommend that is because of what may happen with returns going forward. This year, I don't know how your 401k is doing, but, I can imagine, what PSPRS's, investments may be doing so far this year. And when you lock in a pension bond, you have that payment that's there, but it's independent of the returns that are coming in. So if the returns are bad, not only do you have your bond payment, you're now paying extra over on top of that. So, we think our approach is a much more measured approach than that. And I think the pension bonds are riskier actually than people may think. But some communities are in a bad situation, and I don't blame them for doing that if they're underwater.
Yes, sir.
Well, not questions, just comments. I appreciate how our city, we've all seen other cities in Arizona who don't do so well when it comes to tackling the PSPRS monster. So I'm thankful that we do have our staff that works on this. Just in the whole PSPRS thing, I hate terms like liability, because to me that's for like insurance or someone who does something bad. It makes you lose the human aspect of this whole thing. It's more like a responsibility. It's our responsibility to these people who served in our city, right? Our firefighters and our police officers. They don't work a 9 to 5, They all have that one bad call that they have to deal with every day, rest of their life, right? So I just want everybody to think about these things when we talk about PSPRS. Yes, it's a huge number. What is that for? What does that come from, right? That's somebody's livelihood. They didn't just do 3 or 4 years and leave. No, this is their career. They have to deal with cancer for the rest of their life because they put on equipment that's full of cancer, and nobody else has to do that. No other jobs do that. Line of duty deaths, we see that all the time. We don't have to deal with that. Just simple things like go to the grocery store, go to Fry's, go to Safeway. You'll see the guys trying to shop for their lunch. They get a call. They got to go, right? Good luck. They're going to have a ham sandwich that night because they're not going to have time to come back and eat. So things like that, right? Just these guys and women and men that we see on the scene all the time, they go on light duty. That's a whole different ballgame for them as well. That kind of changes things for them, their schedule, their hours, all that stuff. So just all these things I want to have you keep in mind. It's their pension, right? It's not just this PSPRS name that we give it and a liability. I hate that term. I really do. It drives me nuts. But I get it. I know it's our liability, but I think it's more like a responsibility that we owe people.
It's an accounting term.
Right. Yeah. And I hate putting that accounting term on somebody's livelihood that they gave to our city.
It's risk.
Yes. And I hope they all live long, long lives. That's it.
Okay.
And thank you, Mr. Rodriguez, for those comments. And Mr. Felix is probably the leading expert CFO in the state on this. He probably knows more about the system and how it works than anybody, so we're really fortunate to have him working with us.
And a lot more than I want to. Leave anytime soon.
Mr. Felix, thank you for this presentation, and I really do like your recommendations and the options. They make the most logical sense. You talked about Queen Creek and how they're doing it at funding all employees at the max salary range. And I'm sorry if I've missed this somewhere in the conversation again, but how long do you think it would take us? We're obviously working in that direction. Kind of what's your feel for how long it'll take us to get to where we are funding at maximum salary ranges?
Well, in the next year, we're going to lose, 5 officers, 6 police officers.
We're doing
they're going to grow a lot quicker than the firefighters, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And we're doing it based on attrition rates, Mayor Pro Tem Gray.
Okay,
so,
I see. That makes, so as
the attrition happens, that's when we're doing it that way.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else on PSPRS? I thought it was a good presentation too, David.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is only part of our retirement system, though. We still have challenge with ASRS as well, and that's not as bad shape as this one is, and probably doesn't need a complete blow by blow like you gave us today. But I would like to just hear from you sometime about the Arizona retirement system and where their status is and where we are on contributions. Maybe just one slide.
Okay.
So we have an idea of where we stand going into the budget.
No, we'll have that, call that out, because we normally call it out in the budget book. So
Yeah,
we'll
it's
have
usually
that.
not in the budget books, but we need to understand that we have 2 retirement systems and they're both not equal, and
One's funded better.
yeah, one's that are doing a little better on the returns, and the other one isn't. Okay, well, thanks, David. Appreciate your time. Next up, we have a Ccom presentation, and I see Mike sitting back there. Mr. Klein?
Mike, press escape. Press escape. It's on the top.
Right there, on the top. Right, there we go.
Little arrow on the far right. So click that. No, click that.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, all right. Mr. Mayor, members of council, thanks for the opportunity to speak to you about Ccom this afternoon. I'd like to ask for your indulgence for just a few minutes as I give you a little bit of background on Ccom for those of you that might not have been here in 2018 when Ccom was stood up and developed. Ccom is a critical link in the law enforcement public safety continuum in our region. The folks at Ccom are the first person everybody talks to when they have this emergent situation in their lives, and they bring it to us, and then we are responsible to hand it out to those who are responding, be it police, fire, sheriff's department, and in some instances even ambulance companies and stuff like that. Ccom is called a PSAP, or a Public Safety Answering Point. It is one of 81 answering points in the state of Arizona. We are the only regional PSAP in the state. And through the state 911 office, they have tried to regionalize these in an effort to kind of consolidate costs and the technology that goes into the PSAPs. And so we are the first truly regional PSAP in the state. And we are the only one in the state that employs what we call the priority dispatch protocols. What that allows us to do, our folks are trained in priority dispatch, which we give police, fire, and EMS pre-arrival instructions to the callers. We literally walk people through the process of how to best deal with this situation. Ccom is governed by a board of directors and managed by myself as the director on scene, Susan Papatrafon Smith as the administrator, and then Melissa as a supervisor. Melissa is currently actively involved also as a line dispatcher based on staffing issues. Okay, we are allotted 20 dispatch positions, 2 supervisors, one of which is vacant. That supervisor had to leave, and a records and GIS clerk. Currently, we're at a 35% staffing level. I have 7 dispatchers, and with Melissa dispatching full-time aside from her supervisory duties, that brings us to 35%. Our saving grace, if you will, is that we have part-timers and assistants through the city with 6 fire department members, and then we're also using National Guard members to supplement on taking and triaging phone calls. We currently serve 16 fire departments through the region. In a number of those instances, those fire departments are small volunteer departments out in the East Valley, and they do not pay a subscription to Ccom. That was preordained at the onset. Okay. We also have dispatch services for HCI, ambulance company, that pretty well covers the I-10 corridor, if you will. And then we also have we cover the National Park Service. There are 6 law enforcement agencies. At this time, the Tombstone Marshal's Office and the City of Bisbee are contracted on a part-time basis, where we do them evenings and weekends, holidays. And then the Cochise County Sheriff's Department, City of Cervista, Huachuca City, and the Park Service, we do 24/7, 365. Ccom's a busy place. The slide in front of you gives you some basic numbers, but I'll tell you that 888 911 calls. This is based on the 2021 year-end report. Additionally, we have 134,973 calls received on the admin or non-emergency lines. And that's split for a reason. The way the phones are set up, we often get 911 emergent calls on the admin lines. And that's a product of just the way the phone systems are. So we can tell you that we have the 54,888 deliberately through 911, plus there's a lot of others I can tell you come through the admin lines. That has an impact because when we start to triage calls, we got to be careful who we have triaging those calls to make sure they have the same level or caliber of training to be able to deal with the potentially emergent call very quickly, or transfer it just as quickly so the caller doesn't have to wait. Finally, there are 100,889 calls for service entered into the CAD, which is a computer-aided dispatch. Everything's computers. Everything is computers down there. 2021 report gives us an average of 519 phone calls a day coming into the center. Okay. Now, through the CAD and the Spillman Records Management System, Susan, in her wisdom with the numbers, we can look at all these other agencies and what their call load is because it's recorded in the system, in the 911 system. And by comparison, you know, we get like smaller towns around the region have like 50, 60 calls a day. So we are significantly busier for obvious reasons in this region. Ccom was developed in 2018, and as a result, as part of that collaboration between the city and the county, a number of challenges were experienced. When you take different workforces, different policies, different procedures, different people, and you put them all together, a whole lot of work had to be done trying to get that smoothed out. And we're continuing to deal with those challenges. But in spite of that, we're offering a level of service unlike any other PSAP in the state of Arizona because of the training we do at the ProQA and the level of the caliber of the people that we hire. Okay? In order to continue that, though, we have to be competitive in the world. And you, as the council, have already seen some of those efforts have come through HR to get there and stay there in terms of competitiveness in the marketplace. I can tell you that doing the job fairs that I've done, aside from other things I've done in terms of trying to recruit and stuff like that, is a very competitive environment. And you can't just throw money through payroll at it. You have to do a number of different things to try to make the place a place they want to work at, because the nature of the job is far more difficult than you see on TV. The nature of the people we have to have is far more important than is represented on TV. So what we've done, well, now for a number of months, is looked at our entire hiring process and polished it to the best we can to look for people, recruit people, test people, and get to know them well enough to make them a viable candidate to be able to drop in and run with the caliber of people that we have there. So I cited already that we've worked with HR. As you know, and you've talked already about our class comp process, and that is a fluid process in that you're constantly chasing, almost like a moving target. But through that, we have determined where we needed to be versus where we were, and we were behind, as were a number of different positions across the scale. So what we have done, back in March, we administered a 4% market and a 2% step increase using unexpended salaries to offset that cost. Still weren't there. So as we continue to plan, and as was brought before this body here recently, another 4% market shift and 2% increase in July, followed by another 2% market in January 23. And at that time, we will be at the market for this position in our peer organizations in the state. Now, admittedly, that, as you know, that is a moving target, but that's where we're at this point in time. These adjustments are reflected in this budget. Okay, they've been proposed to the board, and I've already a couple weeks, 3 weeks ago, presented to the Board of Supervisors as well. Ccom is growing. I have recently completed a contract with Sunsight's Pierce. It's pending their officer's signature. Bisbee Police and Fire are on. That was in April. At Sunsight's Pierce, I anticipate being finished by the end of this month if I can chase down the officers. We're working with county procurement and their IT on the fire station alerting program that was brought up in this chamber previously. For your support on that. We had emails just last week on how that is progressing. It is moving along. And finally, through the work of Chief of Staff Alinen, particularly at the Sheriff's Office, we're potentially enjoying the benefits of a $4.8 million DEMA grant. It's going to be used across a number of the participants in Ccom, but as it relates to this top here, offset costs associated with our computer systems and stuff at Ccom. The specifically just over $500,000 at $501,275 directly to Ccom that will make an impact through our 28-29 fiscal budget by offsetting costs associated with computer systems, Motorola in particular, and the systems that we run at the consoles. As was talked about before, with all these grants, you budget for it, but then have backup plans and stuff. But there's every indication that this money, although not formally received at this time, is good to go. Okay. The numbers before you basically are my entirety of my budget, really, as compared to what was spoken of before. Kind of simple. Personnel being the highest cost, obviously, at $1.9 million. And again, that number is already represented in the budget, and it accounts for those increases that we spoke of. Travel and training remained even, and frankly, with such low staff, I don't have people nor opportunity to send them to training. So that's just the way that is at this stage of the game. Likewise for the memberships, IT services is a very important element. It is the lifeblood of our agency. The computers and the radios, it's never ending. And for that reason, it's at over $500,000. Building maintenance, we work with the county on the building maintenance, and it's pretty stable. I deal with Mr. Morose over there regularly, and there hadn't been any real issues with that. And then the other line items are pretty well in line. The total budget is $2,694,394. To get to that, we have subscriber agencies that pay us for our services. But as I mentioned earlier, not all of them pay because they simply don't have the funds to do it. These small fire departments, volunteer fire departments, do not have those funds. So what happens is we work up our budget, and we need to acknowledge that we are running at a deficit on the front side. That's just the way it is. We run at a deficit. And by the way the IGA is organized, the city and the county, as the principals, split the difference on that deficit. And this year, based on a total budget of $2,694,394, balanced against the assessments of $2,065,996, there's a deficit of $628,399, which split at $314,199 apiece ends up a cost to the city of Seer at $885,399, which I would add is down from last year by $141,600 or $800. So the cost to City of Sierra Vista this year is that much less than it was last year, and that's largely due to the grant funds and stuff that we've been able to enjoy. Mr. Mayor, I'll try to answer any questions you or council might have.
Well, before I turn it over to council for questions, I want to thank you, Mike, for coming in and doing this. You've got some special people really that are keeping our community safe. It's a very detail-oriented job, and they have to be motivated to do it. So we're very glad that you're leading that process. And please express my thanks to your workers. So, questions from the council?
No questions, just comments, but.
Well,
I just wanted to, same thing, thank you for Mike for coming there, and the Ccom has come so far from, I mean, the dispatch is always good when it was a PD. It was very PD heavy, and they did a great job there, and then trying to mesh the two with all these services we talked about, all these districts, all these little outlying agencies. What an amazing job it is to try to do, combine those all together. Just the language itself is amazing to try to keep the right, talking with all these agencies. So I really applaud the people that work there to make that happen. And it's not an easy job. And there's a reason why people don't stay in that job very long. It's hard to keep people. It's a very, very stressful job. So hats off to everybody that hangs out.
Thank you, Ms. Rickers.
Sure.
Yeah, same. Just appreciate everything y'all do. It's about 22 calls an hour, 24 hours. 365 days. So not a fun job, not a very stressful job. So appreciate everything you do, and thanks for the breakdown.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate you coming. Okay, we now move on to report on recent trips, meetings, and future meetings. I attended via Skype or whatever it's called, Zoom or whatever it was. Yeah. The League of Cities board meeting. There's not really much to report because the legislature has not been doing a whole lot. There hasn't even been a discussion on budget items, etc., which usually gets people excited. And they were, the prior 2 weeks, I think they met one day a week, and no bills were being moved, so there was not a lot of news there. So we did some of the admin things that the league has to do to include the league budget. And the league also has a property corporation that owns their building, their parking lot, et cetera, and that's supervised by the board as well. So we had a property corporation meeting. So a lot of excitement in Phoenix that day. Okay, anybody else? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We had the 4th of July meeting. Just to back brief you more than anything, we do have fireworks. So we had 2 shipment containers come in, and we'll get our piece from the fireworks from that. So we do have fireworks, and then everything else is going as planned.
The check went out from the Rotary too.
Yeah. So
pay for them.
And we're hoping, Irene left already, we're hoping Charleston is finished by the 4th, so we don't have, Charleston Road is going to be closed. So we're hoping it's done by the 4th. She said it should be done by the 2nd. I know. I see him back there.
Knock on wood.
We're hoping, according to Irene, and I'm going to hold her accountable.
Okay.
But no, the best news is we do have fireworks. So
yeah. So those are proceeding. All right.
Yes, sir.
Anybody else? Mr. Patucci.
Yeah, just let you know, I'll be attending a meeting of the Cochise County Solid Waste Rate Review and Advisory Board meeting that I chair, and as well as the Cochise County Tourism Council, which they also railroaded me into chairing. So, and I don't anticipate any recommendations for increased rates and tipping fees out of that meeting. There are some issues with the Tourism Council. We got word that Benson was going to pull out of the Tourism Council, which is unfortunate. So we'll have some discussions with the rest of the group as to how they want to proceed moving forward. I've talked to the county, and they've indicated a desire to continue to work with us. So there will be some form of the Tourism Council moving forward, and I should be able to report on that to you Thursday night.
Okay. Yeah. Questions?
Chuck, I just have a quick question. So is Bisbee and Tombstone still in that, or are they not?
Tombstone is not, Bisbee is.
Tombstone hasn't been in a while.
I couldn't remember how long it had been. Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Rachel, did you want to talk about the MPO meeting on Theater Drive? Or?
Sure, I can. So we had a MPO work session on the Theater Drive study, and it was the TAC board and the MPO board that met along with consultants, and it was a facilitated meeting about what we would like to see happen with Theater Drive going forward. And so a consensus came to be about just basically making it walkable and bikeable, and how that's accomplished. And lit, yes, and safe. Safety was the number one priority that came out of that meeting, which was not at all surprising, I don't think. So they will go back, the engineering and design firm will go back and do some work, and that's when public outreach, public education, and those kinds of things will happen. And then we'll look at how that's gonna be funded and go from there.
Okay. So the last thing I got on
Did
here
I
is
miss
future discussion items. Victoria, have we got anything scheduled for, other than regular budget things that you've already talked about?
Mr. Mayor, I'm tracking two things. I do not have them scheduled yet. One is the legislative session update, which, as you mentioned just a few minutes ago, it's not over yet. So that'll be later this summer. And we're also working on the commission discussion that we know council wants to have.
Right. Anything else? No. Seeing nothing else before the council, appreciate everybody's participation. Please adjourn.